Slay. Got it. Everyone doing all right? Love to hear it. I know it's a stressful time of year. Everyone has finals. My coworker Maddie, they came in and they're just like dead quiet for like the entire off or for like a half hour. And I'm like, "You're doing all right?" And they're like, "I have two essays I need to get done, and I'm not going to leave this office until I get both of them done." And I'm like, honestly, respect. But yeah, it's tough out there. Yeah, I just want to say, real quick, thanks on behalf of Stu University, Student Events and Entertainment, and the whole music club for coming to these events. This is our last one of the semester, and it's been really fun to be able to do these. Right, I'm gonna give it a little bit more time. Otherwise, I think we're good to go. Awesome. So, everyone, I'd like to welcome you to our last Music Industry Job Series panel of the semester. My name's Elias. I work in the Student Events and Entertainment Office, and we're beyond excited to have you all here today. We have a very special guest tonight. She's known for her work covering the Minnesota music scene at The Current and is now the host of the Official Prince podcast. She's the author of the book Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound, and she's currently working on a follow-up. I'm proud to introduce you all to Miss Andrea Swensson. How are you doing today, Andrea?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. It's great to have you here. So I guess we can just hop right into it. How would you describe what it is that you do?
Yeah. Music journalist covers a lot of it, which has evolved over time, and I'm sure we'll get into that. My job has taken lots of interesting twists and turns over the years, but at the moment, it means writing books, working on a podcast. I do some freelance, like social media copywriting and promotional copywriting for the Prince estate. But yeah, mostly my book is kind of my main focus. And then I also do some like articles and things on the side, but it's all under the umbrella of music journalism.
Awesome. So I guess just take us through it. How did you get we're all students here, we're all college students, and we're all trying to chart out, what do we want our careers to be? What do we want to do? So I guess I want to ask you, how did your career start and sort of how did it bring you to where you are today?
Yeah, well, it's been over 20 years now, so I'll try to be brief. But I actually wrote my very first article in college. I was going to Hamline University and wrote a couple articles for their student newspaper about music, CD reviews. I believe the first Gorillaz album came out when I was a freshman in college, so I reviewed that. Wrote some interviews with local musicians that were playing around campus and that kind of thing. But I certainly didn't go to school for music journalism. I was actually a music major, and it wasn't until I started doing it kind of as a thing to try that it became a passion for me. And I realized how much I really enjoyed it and loved it. And I basically changed everything around and stopped being a music major and reevaluated what I wanted to be doing and started going down the writing path instead, and took journalism classes and professional writing classes, and it just kind of all clicked. I've always really enjoyed writing from like very early age. It was something that I was really passionate about, and for whatever reason it took until college to put it together that I could write about music, which is something I'm also passionate about, and kind of combine these two loves together. So it really started with written journalism for many years. The landscape was very different from how it is now. There were three alt weeklies And The Onion also had a arts and entertainment section. So really 4 newspapers that you could pitch as a journalist to, write freelance articles. There were the 2 daily papers that had really robust music coverage. The magazines all had really robust coverage, and people actually paid for music criticism at that time and paid well. So it's a little different than it is now. This was in like 2003, 2004, is when I really started, pitching and getting my first articles that I actually got paid for, which is very thrilling. But I just knew that it was something that I really wanted to do. So I started volunteering to write for blogs, which at that time was like a new thing. There were a lot of music blogs here in town that were kind of getting going. I started writing concert reviews for a blog that was all about just reviewing live shows, and just started going out like 3 or 4 nights a week and really trying to understand, who the local bands are and what the cool venues are, and kind of get the rhythm of how a local music scene works and who's where and who's important and that kind of thing, for several years. And then I also started working at the Electric Fetus, which was a very important part of my local music, like scholarship, learning, the players and that kind of thing. My first full-time job was at City Pages. I was the music editor of City Pages for 4 years, starting in 2008. And then I went from City Pages to NPR, where I basically launched their online music coverage for The Current and their blog and social media accounts covering local music. And over the 10 years that I worked at NPR, my job took all kinds of interesting twists and turns. I started getting into the actual radio side of things and contributing to on-air reporting, eventually hosted a show of my own, the local show on Sunday nights, and also did podcasts. And I was just really hungry and curious to learn how it all worked. That I was sitting in cubicles surrounded by people who knew how to edit audio and use Pro Tools, and I wanted to learn that too. And I was surrounded by DJs and hosts, and I wanted to learn that. So I just kind of absorbed over time all the different ways that you could be part of a radio station like The Current. And then went freelance in 2021 to really focus on more long form work, like writing books and like working for the Prince Estate on this podcast. And that's where I am now.
Awesome. So, that's my question is, do you feel like, as a music journalist, is there like a through line to like all the things you've done? Because you've done a lot, sound like very like invested in like doing like all of the different things to sort of understand it all. Do you feel like there's like sort of like something central to either your philosophy of how you like did it all, or like what you sort of see your mission is as a music journalist?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think from a pretty early point, I was really curious to know more about the local scene. That's just something that's always been appealing to me. I think the idea of connecting with people that are in your own community and learning about what they're doing and how to support them is just kind of fundamentally important to me. I think you could make an argument that it's just as important as, eating local food and supporting your local economy. Like there's something about investing in the creative people in your own scene that I think is just really exciting. So that was kind of an early focus that I've continued to kind of hone in on. And then in recent years, I've become really interested in finding kind of the untold stories about Minnesota music, and particularly people from marginalized backgrounds that aren't always discussed when it comes to like the history of Minnesota music or even what's going on right now. So my book and the book that I'm working on now are both about really digging into the kind of historic Black community of musicians here that often get overlooked. People like to talk about Prince like he's like the first Black person that ever existed in Minnesota, but he was actually part of this like very robust community of amazing, talented Black artists. So that's become a big focus for me in recent years. And then also highlighting women, just from my own experience of observing and participating in the scene. It's just often something that's not discussed with the same amount of seriousness or yeah, the same level of detail as their male counterparts. And like there's no such thing as a female musician genre. Like women make all kinds of music, and we should be talking about them with the same kind of you know, seriousness that we do everybody else. So that's become another kind of passion of mine, but really all focused on people in Minnesota, past and present, that are, you know, making this place cool and important.
Awesome. So it's really, I mean, there just is so much music in Minnesota. I, it's like really overwhelming because in my work, like researching local bands for shows, I'm like overwhelmed by like how just like rich like our scene is here. And I think it's really great that you've spent so much of your careers documenting it, making sure people know about it. So I guess my next question is, what would you say is your biggest career accomplishment? Is there anything that you're really proud of?
Oh, I mean, I certainly know, like personally, what's been the most significant to me is probably covering Prince. I would say it's been like a huge part of the last decade of my life. I started, I mean, I started writing about Prince when I started writing about music because, you know, I'm in Minnesota covering local music. He's a giant in that field. But it really was from about 2012 to 2016, like the last 4 years of his life. I was very actively covering him, going out to Paisley Park all the time to cover concerts. And through that experience, ended up meeting him and interviewing him and just getting to hang out with him for a really unforgettable period of time and become kind of part of his orbit for a while. And after he died, it became this almost like a beat that I had to cover of his death and what it meant to Minnesota and people here and how we responded to it. And it really just took over my life in a very kind of unexpected way. But, you know, reflecting on it now that it's now been 7 years since he's passed, it's just such an incredible honor to know that he was actually paying attention to people in his own community and that he took the time to express to me that he was reading everything I wrote and that he appreciated that someone was out there, you know, documenting what he was up to, because the people in the media tend to focus on his, you know, commercial peaks, Purple Rain in the 80s, and it's all very important and it's part of his story, but he was very present in the moment and focused on the future. So I think he appreciated that I was, you know, checking out what he was doing now and listening to his new music and writing about it and telling people what he was up to out at Paisley and that kind of thing. So extremely significant personally. And I still think I'm processing what it means for my professional life and all of that, even all these years later.
I mean, Prince's legacy is like, it cannot be overstated what it was to the state of Minnesota. Like whenever like the topic of Prince comes up, there's always like someone in the room who has a like personal story connected to it. Like I had a classmate in high school who was like, "Oh yeah, my mom was like on the set of like the Purple Rain music video," or it's like, "Oh, like oh my dad, he followed Prince's tour for like over a dozen shows," and I'm like, "What?" But they're like the like impact like yeah, on Minnesota music scene, like culturally, it's still what you think about, when you think about Sound of Minneapolis, so much of it is Prince for so many people. So I guess the next question is, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but when you like started, when you were in college, what did you think you were going to be doing at this point in time? Like, what did you want? And how far off did you end up getting from that?
I mean, so this was early 2000s. So my dream was like, kind of the stereotypical like professional magazine woman in a movie, with like a fancy office and like a cool magazine job and getting to go to all the parties. And I definitely had that kind of cliche in my head of I just want to be, in the mix with like what's up and coming and what's cool and what defines like a scene and all of that stuff. And I think the older I get now and the further into this work I am, the more unglamorous it's become. I mean, so much of my work now is like sitting in a dusty corner of the library going through like microfilm or library archives or someone's basement. Like I literally spend a lot of my time right now digging through the subject of my next book's basement for photo albums and clippings and clues and like things that we might want to put in the book and all these things. Like it's not fancy, but it's really important work to me and it means so much to me now. And I think I've just taken on a different attitude about all of it and what it means and yeah, what is feels significant.
Yeah. So my next question is, you mentioned that you work for the Prince Estate, and I want to know sort of how did you get involved with them? How did you get involved with Prince and like that whole scene, that whole beat, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, it really started when he was alive. I was just really actively covering what he was doing, as I said, and there was kind of a turning point where they actually started like reaching out and communicating directly with me, inviting me to events and kind of expressing like basically Prince really wants you to be at this one and write about it and that kind of thing. And that led to me meeting with him and which is like a whole other long story. And um, after he died, one of his day-to-day managers reached out to me and we went out to lunch and that's when he told me that like Prince really liked my writing and really like appreciated the perspective and the way that I wrote about him. And so there was an opportunity to contribute some writing to Paisley Park at that time. They were developing it into a museum, which is what Prince actually wanted and asked for before he died. He had all these written plans about how he even like wanted the tour guides to speak about each room in his complex and everything. And it was very structured around what he wanted. So to try to honor what he liked and, was talking about in the years leading up to his death, they said, well, we should get this girl to write about Prince for like our museum because we know that he liked her, and which is like a very mind-blowing thing still to this day to even like think about or talk about. But so that kind of started things. I ended up writing some books that went into the gift shop at Paisley Park that are about the museum itself and then about some of the collections that they were starting to put together, his guitars and his clothes, which was a very surreal experience because this was only 6 months after he had died. And suddenly I'm sitting in this room at Paisley Park next to the doves and this woman's like taking out Prince's like iconic outfits and steaming them. And I'm trying to, figure out what to write about each one. And it all just started kind of escalating. They asked me to do more and more things over the years. And then because I was working at the radio station, the idea came up, well, if we're going to do a podcast about Prince, we should partner with this radio station that Prince really loved. He was a very avid supporter of the Current. He actually came to one of our birthday parties at First Avenue just to like show his support of the station and had several of us out to Paisley Park to meet with him at different times. And so that kind of built organically too as a way to honor things that they knew that he was interested and passionate about. Having a podcast that was being put together by a radio station that he appreciated felt like a very natural thing. So yeah, it just kind of kept progressing. And I just kept saying yes to everything because I felt like I couldn't say no, even when I was doing like an insane amount of work on top of, my normal job. And then in the pandemic, like so many people, I got to a point where there's just only so much I could do in a day. I'm also a mom, and I've had at that point, a 2-year-old at home full time working these two jobs. And I said, okay, I got to pick something, and left the radio station to focus on these other projects. So that's kind of how it all happened.
It's really cool. So I guess my next question is to like what, I guess, skill or strategy or I guess intuition do you think like was the most like crucial to you like getting where you are now? Like like is there anything that you felt like, I don't want to say there's like a secret like method to being successful, but is there anything where you're like, I'm glad I did this. I'm glad that I put in work in XYZ area because it got me to where I am.
Well, I guess I would say a couple things. I mean, first of all, the Minnesota scene is big. Like you said, there's so many artists here, but also it's small in the way that a lot of people know each other, especially once you get into the industry level of things. These are people that have been orbiting each other for decades. And I've just always had the approach of like always being extremely respectful and taking the high road and being really compassionate with the way that I conduct my business, and just being really sensitive to that dynamic of living in a place where people are very passionate and somewhat protective of this scene. And especially once you get into certain pockets of it, and wanting to respect the hard work that's being put in by so many people for often like no money, just to do cool stuff, like to put on shows and to create festivals and to, make this place vibrant and active. So I think that's just kind of a baseline thing for me, is like always really approaching everyone with this level of like dignity and respect and compassion. And then along with that, I think I've realized over time and making mistakes and learning about what it is that I do and how I do things and what makes me different is I think I interview people in a kind of unique way, because I really am interested in learning about people and their personal stories and things that they've experienced in their life that are sometimes hard to talk about. And through I had a podcast on mental health at the Current where I talked to a lot of different musicians about many different struggles that they'd faced and overcome. And doing that kind of interviewing, I realized like I really enjoy and get a lot of satisfaction out of that kind of human connection. So I think that's been kind of now a through line in my more recent work, as I've kind of like leaned into that of what's the real like raw human story behind work, because that's why I love music. Like I love listening to songs and then learning, what was going on in that person's life and how they're like processing it through their art. I think that's just like such a fundamental like great thing, that music is this gift for people, that it helps us like get through this like really hard stuff. So yeah, I think that's maybe something else that's now kind of a core thing that I've woven into my work.
Awesome. That's really I would just love like how like insightful you clearly have a lot of care for the scene. Like there are just so many like great people here, and it's just such like a tough industry, and like you need friends. That's definitely something I hear a lot, is that you need people in your corner. So it's really cool that you've been like an advocate for this music scene. Um, I guess now I want to just open it up to the room. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask Andrea?
No pressure.
I have a question. Okay, so currently I am an undergraduate student and I work at Target, but I want to get a job where I can like work with music in some way, shape, or form as an undergraduate student, then I don't know, like I tried like looking on Google, searching it up, but like I never like see anything. So I was just wondering, like, do you have like a way or like a little hookup for me to get into it, you know?
Well, I should ask, like, what is your ideal path? Like, what is your dream job?
Well, right now I am in the process of transferring to the School of Music for vocal performance. So I was just wanting a job where maybe I could, because when I say I want to work with music, people automatically go, "Oh, we'll work at Schmidt Music," and I'm like, I don't want to sell instruments, you know, like I don't know, honestly, like anything really, like anything besides work selling instruments.
Yeah. I would say, there's a lot of entry level positions available at venues. There's definitely like First Avenue now owns many venues, but they have a whole office staff that manages all of these different venues and promotions and booking. And it's just a lot of things that they're doing constantly. So they have a pretty robust staff of like people that are higher level up, actually, making the booking decisions and things, but then a lot of people that are just helping administratively keeping the business going. So I would keep an eye on, I know they post their jobs on like social media and on their website, but it would be for like, they might post something, but it's actually at the turf club or, a smaller venue. I think that would be a great foot in the door. There's two different music, how would you describe them? Production facilities, companies in town that also have a lot of entry level work.
Oh, what
Copycat,
are they?
Copycats Media is one of them, and then Noiseland Industries is another. Noiseland actually just opened a vinyl pressing plant here in Minnesota, which is really cool. It's taken some of the pressure off of like the year-long delay to get vinyl made for local artists. But they have a lot of entry level like graphic design or administrative work too for people that are, coming in and wanting to get 500 CDs pressed up for their album that they're putting out, that kind of thing. So that's one that maybe doesn't immediately come to mind, but it's definitely people that are very networked into the community and working directly with artists. And then what was the other one that I would also look into studios often are hiring student or entry level position people that it would be a great way to hands-on learn how like a studio is operated. Someone that can help with plugging in. I don't know how studios work, but well,
Okay, like what do you mean? Like when you say studio, is there like, because when I think of studio, I just think of like some random person renting out a studio for play something. So, like,
I
what
would
do you mean?
there's more established ones. You're okay. Let's see how many I can name off the top of my head. I'm thinking of like the Hideaway or like the library in Northeast, or there's smaller studio spaces, but they're very professional and they're handling a lot of local artists coming in and working with the engineers. And I don't know how they go about hiring people, but I know that I've talked to people in the industry that got their start basically like working as a admin or assistant engineer in that kind of setting, and you're basically just working as like a PA kind of for the actual engineer that's running the session. But it can be a great way to learn about that environment if that's something you're interested in too.
Can you like name one or two off the top of your head, maybe, just so I can get like an idea?
Yeah, so the library is a studio in Northeast. The Hideaway is also, I think, in Northeast. They do a lot more like hip hop. Joe Mabbitt is the main engineer there. The High School of Recording Arts in St. Paul has studios, and I've met some people that were college level students that were working in their studios helping high schoolers learn how to do things. So that might be an interesting like networking opportunity. And that one's it's like right on University Avenue in like the Midway area. Trying to think of some more off the top of my head. I mean, Paisley Park has a lot of entry level positions, honestly, because they have people that are coming in and learning how to do kind of behind the scenes work at the facility. So I would just
How do you spell that, Paisley?
Paisley Park,
Mhm.
Paisley like the shape. That's Prince's building.
Oh, okay.
So it's a museum, but they also do events, and they have a lot of people on staff that just do various things to keep the building operating. That's another idea, but I would say like those are some that come to mind. Venues, the actual like production companies, and then recording studios, doing some research into different ones that seem appealing to you. There's a lot here that are kind of that smaller level but very professional studio that are really doing a lot of business. That could be a good gateway.
Yeah, I mean, there are like a lot of one thing that is like very interesting to me, who is it? John Fields. He's based in Minnesota, and he like worked on like all of like the like Jonas Brothers albums back in the day.
Oh,
And
wow.
Jonas Brothers, Demi Lovato, Miley Cyrus, like all the Disney bands. And he just did a record with this really cool band, Meet Me at the Altar. I love them very much. And they flew out to Minnesota for a few weeks to record that. Um, but yeah, so I mean, you'd be surprised how much like, professional like level like music is done in Minnesota. There's a lot of cool opportunities here.
Yeah. Do you know of any that she didn't say?
Um,
I'm really trying to get a
you should,
job.
you
Let's
should
workshop this. Let's get a
here's
list
what I
going.
will say. What year are you in?
Huh?
What year are you in?
I'm in my second year right now. I'm going into my third.
Okay. Next year. Every year, Student Events and Entertainment hires new people to work on Spring Jam, the big music festival. People are always complaining about the Spring Jam festival lineup. You can have a role in shaping that if you apply. So I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah. I think applications for that go up in like October, September, or something like that.
Mm.
Uh,
I'm not necessarily qualified to talk on this topic, but I would really recommend getting involved with the radio on campus, the Radio K. I'm a DJ right there now, and they hire different positions, but they'll give you like free tickets to shows if you review it, and like so much stuff. I've learned, like, made so many connections just with people who are passionate. So, like, recommend a lot. It's super cool.
You said it's called The Radio and it's on
Yeah,
campus?
it's called Radio K. Like, radio is in radio and K is in the letter K.
Oh, okay.
They have like Instagram stuff.
I didn't think of radio, and I worked in radio. It's a great idea.
Yeah, super recommend. It's super rad and sick.
Nice. What's your major?
I'm a journalism major.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
awesome.
you.
Well, hopping off that, does anyone else have a question they want to ask?
I actually did, kind of hopping off that. So like I said, I'm a journalism major. And you said you were a music major who kind of like made the switch to journalism, whereas I'm like kind of in the opposite. Like, I'm a journalism major. Do you have any like advice or like hints for like incorporating music into that? Because like I'm a journalism major, but I really don't want to work in like political or like the Today Show or kind of anything like that. Like, I want to do music journalism. So like, do you have any advice or like helpful hints for like incorporating that into the journalism aspect?
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're off to a great start getting connected at Radio K and doing concert reviews, because that's really how I started too, was just practicing and trying things and seeing what I liked and what was interesting to me. But I would just say, this community I've found to be very supportive, and just seeking out, venues that are doing interesting things, or even artists that are kind of up and coming that you're interested in, and really trying to form relationships with people that are, interested in the same things that you are, and that are headed in a cool creative direction that you'd be curious about. I found that in general, people are very receptive to that, because they make music to be heard, and if you're listening and you're receiving what they're doing and responding to it, that's a very validating thing for an artist or any creative person to experience. So don't be afraid to reach out to people and forge those relationships. That's really how I've done so much of my work, is forming trust with people and nurturing friendships and relationships. And I think the journalism training, especially at the beginning, because I started out in the alt weekly world, which was like the Wild West, there was this kind of philosophy that was really hammered into me of like, you can't be friends with these people. Like you have to be objective and you have to be, come in like with your own strong opinion that isn't influenced by anything else. And I think to a certain extent that's the valid. Like if you're doing like reporting on hard news, sure. But if you're reporting about a cultural community, you have to be part of it to really understand how it works and who the players are and what the dynamics are. There's going to be like scene gossip and drama that you get involved in unwillingly. It's just how it works. And I think not shying away from that and not being afraid to actually like have real relationships with on like a human level with people is so important. So yeah, I would say just, find the people that you're kind of naturally gravitating toward and see what they're like and try to hang out with them.
Yeah, thank you.
So I also have there are a few people who RSVP'd but couldn't make it tonight, and we have some questions from them too that they wanted me to ask. So I'm just gonna go ahead and ask those as well.
Cool.
do, do, do. So there's this one. What styles of music do you mostly write about in your work? And do you think like the sound of the Twin Cities has changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I'm writing a biography of a 95-year-old blues musician. So I've really listened to a lot of specific music for that project, his music in particular. But in general, over the years, I've tried to keep a very open mind because there is so many different styles of music being made here at any given time. I've really tried to learn about as much as I can. I would say the only like definite blind spot I have is metal. I just don't really know anything about it and it all kind of sounds the same to me. I don't know. I tried. But I've really gotten into learning about the jazz scene here and which is very active and robust and the kind of echoes of Prince funk and R&B scene that is still very active here. The pop scene, people like Polisa and people that have come up and gone onto the national scene in that way. That's something that I've covered throughout my whole career. Rock obviously has such a huge legacy here in Minnesota, punk rock specifically, but all kinds of different variations of rock, all country. Tried to be really open to all of it and just learn about it and figure out how it all fits together and influences each other. I do think the sound has changed. I mean, there's definitely, microcosms that happen. Like, for example, I covered, Hippocampus when they were like the little tiny baby band, and then they became the next big hot thing. And then all of a sudden there were like 20 bands that sounded like Hippocampus. And I think that just happens in any scene. But I've definitely seen swells of things, even like Polisa. There was like a lot of bands that sound like Polisa for a while. I covered Lizzo at the very beginning of her career, and there was really nothing like her when she came up. And then all of a sudden there were a ton of projects that sounded like her, which was great because like women in hip hop had been, historically ignored in Minnesota for decades. So she did a lot to kind of open people's minds to that. But you see these little trends coming and going over the years. There's still bands that are artists, I should say, that are, rooted in the Minneapolis sound that Prince created in the 80s and are figuring out ways to modernize that and, bring it into the next generation. So it's really hard to define, but it's always changing. And it's the consistent thing is that it's just so eclectic. And that's the thing that I think keeps me really interested in it, is that there's always something new coming up, but it all somehow like ties together.
Awesome. Another question here. This is a fun one. What's your favorite concert or music event that you've been to in your career?
Oh, I mean, it's hard because it's like there's like Prince and then there's everybody else. But I've probably seen Prince at least 20 times, but seeing him at the Dakota Jazz Club was like an unreal experience. I mean, honestly, like seeing like Lizzo, you know, in the beginning when she was like very green and raw, it was so exciting because you could tell that her talent was astronomical, but it was so unrefined. And I love getting into an artist who's at the beginning of their trajectory like that, because you know that you're like going to go on a ride with them and watch them blossom. And it absolutely happened with her. And that was just like very exciting. She sang at my wedding. So I have a very tender spot in my heart for Lizzo in Minneapolis. She was just, yeah, she was omnipresent, honestly. Like there was a point where she was coming into the current studios, like it seemed like every other week because people would have her like, okay, she's playing flute now with this band, and then she's singing backup with this band, and like, oh, Lizzo's here again. You know, it's just like she was around. So that was definitely like a really cool experience to have, like just witnessing that. Gosh, I don't know. And then, you know, like there's the big touring acts, like seeing Beyonce's Lemonade tour at the TCF Bank Stadium. That was like an incredible show. I'm still convinced she actually made it rain as like a special effect at the show because it just happened so perfectly. And yeah, I've just been very lucky to see, you know, a lot of kind of iconic artists over the years. I've seen Dylan like 20 times. Yeah, lots of standouts, and it's kind of hard to like think off the top of my head, but those are the few that come up right away.
Then I have another question. Actually, I have a few. So this one kind of ties into the fact that you said earlier that you were going to, you know, Hamlin to get a music degree and then you kind of stopped. This is someone who says they want to be involved in like music scoring for like for you know films and television. They don't know, do they want to get like a music degree, or do they want to like start looking at something else and then sort of tie that into their career path? And I don't know if you have an answer there, but what do you think?
I know a few artists that are heavily into music scoring now. Wendy and Lisa, who worked with Prince, have gotten to be friends of mine. And they're out in LA. They've lived in Hollywood actually their whole lives, but they're really plugged into the scene out there. And then actually Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis just started scoring TV, and I think they're going to be doing more. What I understand and have learned about Hollywood, and which is to say, as a person who's lived in Minnesota my whole life and is not part of that, but knows people that are, is that the educational background is almost unnecessary in terms of what people are looking for and with who they want to work with. It's all about talent and connection. And I would say probably more on the connection side than even the talent, and being reliable as well. But I would honestly, if you're interested in that kind of thing, I would honestly suggest taking some screenwriting classes, learn how to navigate like reading a script and what it looks like, and get used to that and comfortable with that. Learn how to read scores and align them with scripts and kind of more of the process of that. I would get into more of like the technical end of things so that you at least have some technical skills. And then my impression is that a lot of people work, or at least get their foot in the door with some kind of spec work, which is to say unpaid work that you've done to create just an example of what you can do. So maybe it's collaborating with like an up and coming screenwriter and offering to make a sample of a score of a scene or something like that. But having some kind of thing that you can use as a calling card is a lot more beneficial than having like a degree necessarily. That's my impression. Again, as someone that's not in Hollywood, but has talked to people about this, because I've been curious about it too, not from a score composing standpoint, but from a screenwriting standpoint. I just think there's a lot of opportunity. That field, it seems to be expanding exponentially with more and more streaming content being put out and more shows and movies being made all the time. So it's interesting.
Awesome. And then one more question here. I want to know, how did you meet Prince and what was that like?
Let's see. Well, I had been writing about him for a while. And the first time I was contacted by his people was actually right after the shows he played at the Dakota Jazz Club, which I covered. And they didn't allow any photography or cell phones into the venue, which was like kind of a new thing at the time. So I'd actually drawn like a doodle of him in my notebook and put it with my review as kind of like a tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, you want to see what it looked like? Here it is. It's like a stick figure basically. And he thought that was hilarious and reached out and asked for like a copy of it. And just, it started this like kind of back and forth thing. And a little while later, I ended up getting an invite out to meet with him at Paisley Park. And it was all facilitated through his drummer, Bobby Z, who was the drummer in the Revolution and, played with him in Purple Rain and all of the kind of peak 80s stuff. And he's still here in town, Bobby is. And so he emailed me at like 6 o'clock on a Thursday or something and said, P wants to meet you. Can you come to Paisley Park tonight? And I was like, yep, sure can. And we got out there, I want to say it was like 11 p.m. We were supposed to be there. And I pulled into the parking lot and realized like, we're the only two people here. Like, it's not a party. It's not like an event. It's like me and Bobby Z and Prince are about to do something together. And I ended up being there for, I want to say maybe 3 hours. And I'd gone out to a bunch of events there where you kind of wait around in his club that he has there, and you could be at hours before he ever comes out. And sometimes he would DJ and sometimes he'd play, and you just never knew. But on this night, it was really unusual that he just immediately like walked out and came up to me and shook my hand like upon arrival and started talking to me. And I realized, I think part of what he was trying to express to me in our meeting was that I had just done a piece about the Purple Rain 30th anniversary at that point, which is wild because it's going to have its 40th anniversary next year. So this was almost 10 years ago. And I think he just wanted me to know that he saw himself as something more than the guy that did Purple Rain. And he played me a bunch of his new music that he was working on. I went into the studio with him and sat on a couch next to him at the mixing board, and he played all these tracks that he'd been working on with his new band. And we ended up talking about all kinds of stuff. After that, he had a little house like jazz combo that was playing live music to kind of like accompany our conversation, which is like, oh, and also Finding Nemo was playing on the screen the whole time we were talking. And it's kind of funny because when I was in the moment, I was just like so focused on like, holy shit, I'm talking to Prince, and like we're actually like having a real conversation. And I've been here for like a while and he's still talking to me. And then as I was driving away, I was like, oh yeah, there's like a lot of strange details that I kind of didn't take in right away. Like I was sitting in this like overstuffed royal purple chair and Finding Nemo's playing, and there's like a band playing just to like set the mood for chatting with him. And I'm like, wow, what a world that he built for himself. It's just so surreal. But anyway, yeah, I really think I think he did this with a lot of people, but I think he just wanted to make it clear that he was paying attention to what I was writing about him and saying about him and covering, and not in like a threatening way, but in a like, I'm paying attention for all the good and bad things that puts into somebody to know that Prince is like reading your work. And then he of course had to end the evening by playing a prank on me, as he did to everybody. And when things were starting to kind of wind down in the conversation, he put out his hand and asked if I wanted to dance with him to this music that was being played. And I think I probably turned like cherry tomato red and was like, wait, what? And before I could even say anything, he whips his hand away and laughs. And he's like, just kidding. And then he did it again, which I was like, wait, like what is happening right now? And then he whipped it away again. He goes, just kidding. And then he like slapped his leg because he was so amused at himself and this joke he's playing on me. And I'm just like, still probably standing frozen. Like, I don't think I reacted the whole time. And he turned and walked away, and Bobby Z leaned in and he was like, I think you have a new friend. It was just, yeah, wild evening.
Yeah, that's incredible. So before I let you go, I do have like one last like closing question I want to ask you. Um, put out about a few years back, thought to be something here. And I just want to ask sort of what inspired you to write that? And more broadly, kind of like what inspires you in general? When you wake up in the morning to like write about music.
Mm. Oh yeah. I'm resisting the urge to like go dig through my records and be like, it was these records. It was because there was a compilation that came out quite a while ago now, more than 10 years ago, called Twin Cities Funk and Soul with this local label, Secret Stash. And they had done incredible archival work digging into long lost 45s that were put out in the 60s and 70s by funk and R&B and soul artists in Minnesota, and reissued them into this compilation, and then put together a tribute show where all of these kind of stars of this other era got to be showcased again and celebrated. And it was like an all Black cast of performers, and people who just aren't traditional, hadn't historically been highlighted in that way in the local scene and celebrated in that way. And that experience of getting to know, what was happening with that compilation, and then going to, I got to go to the rehearsal for that show and meet a bunch of these guys. It was just so eye-opening and almost like maddening to me that there were so many talented artists that had been so overlooked for so long. And it just made me kind of re-examine like what systems I'm a part of as a journalist, that like that could happen. And it really just lit this fire in me of, there's all these people that have just resurfaced again, and their stories are like hanging in the air around me, and they're all in their 70s and 80s. And if someone doesn't ask them about what they did, like it's just going to go away. And that was really motivating to me. Just get the tape recorder running and start asking these people about their lives. And so I spent the next few years in all my very little off time between my other job, going to Perkins for 4 hours with, a man, and flipping through his photo albums with him and listening to all of his memories of the bands that he was in as a teenager. These were, Wee Willie Walker and a man named Herman Jones, and just these incredible artists who had their, stories to tell. And I was just so lucky to be the one that they told them to. So I think that was really what inspired me, was knowing that I could put down in the permanent record, in something that would go into a library and into the historical society and into wherever they put books about obscure Minnesota music, that these people existed and that they contributed to the culture of this place, and that they shaped a scene that birthed these famous musicians like Prince and Jimmy Jam and Morris Day and all the, Minneapolis sound people of their generation. Like they came from somewhere. And it just became like very important to me to tell that story. So as I said, kind of towards the beginning of our chat, that's just become a big passion of mine. Is I'm working on a book now about actually he just turned 96-year-old musician, Cornbread Harris, who's been performing in Minnesota literally since World War II, and has lived through so many iterations of this music scene and seen so many things come and go. And he's still going, and he's still playing, and he's just an amazing person, and it's been really cool to get to help him share his story too. That's really what drives me now, is like find the people that have these incredible histories that we like forgot to ask about and write it down while we still can.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. If anyone has any last questions they want to ask, here's your shot. Going once, going twice.
I have a question. So you talked a lot about like networking and compassion. So I'm just curious, how do you deal with like strong personalities?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I've certainly worked for difficult men, let's be frank, in my time, in all various jobs that I've held. I think what's really fortified me is forming really strong friendships and connections with other women. I have a couple groups that I'm part of. One is like all women arts journalists. One is a Facebook group I started that's just women and gender expansive musicians in Minnesota, which got way out of control. And all of a sudden there were like thousands of members, but it just shows you like there's so many people that are, not always included in the conversation, that we're really hungry for that kind of connection. So finding communities of people that I felt like I could really trust and connect with has helped me so much. And sometimes it's like just going out for drinks and like complaining about shitty stuff that happened, but it's like having people that know what it's like and can like encourage you and tell you to keep going. Like it's so important to find those people to have in your life. And I certainly have been lucky to find those people for myself. And I've found that in that work of, finding those communities, that they're very eager to accept more people into these circles because they know what it's like to be excluded. So yeah, that's been a huge just part of my personal life that's kind of kept me going through a lot of bullshit.
Well, I want to say one more time, thank you, Andrea. I think this is a really great discussion. And I want to thank all of you for coming, to talk. I think we had a really good time, and I'm really hoping we're gonna get to be able to have these conversations again next semester. So thanks for coming, everyone. It's been really fun. Have a great night.
Bye.